Ken, this is Greg. It's March the 7th, year 2022. This is lesson number 3 on the book Holes. Now, I'm going to, as I'm going along, because I know you've read this story, I'm going to be making references to some things that are later in the story, just because you already know them. You know, there's no use keeping it hidden. One of the things that I really like to do, this drives my students crazy because they think I'm crazy for doing this. I like rereading books, sometimes multiple times, because as I reread books, I pick up things that I had missed previously. You know, I've read the book To Kill a Mockingbird so many times that it's just, yeah, I could almost tell you the lines, you know, from memory, and I know how things are going to go. A number of years ago, I decided I was going to read through the book of Genesis. I didn't even have a number of, you know, how many times I wanted to read it, but I think I'm pretty sure I read it 10 times in succession. And I just picked up things that I thought, oh yeah, this makes sense now. Oh yeah, so this is what it's talking about, you know, in the New Testament. Oh yeah, this really makes sense now. So far, you know, I'm pretty sure I talked to you maybe about Jacob, you know, going to Laban, and I think I've talked to you also about Joseph going to Egypt and getting things set up. And that's kind of the way that I'm viewing this book right here as well. Big old story arc going, you know, that covers 100 years. And the things that happened 100 years ago, it's kind of being fulfilled. That's not the right word, but you know, they're taking up, you know, getting things taken care of 100 years ago, accidentally, actually, accidentally getting things taken care of. But anyway, again, the story arc takes place over a period of 100 years. We haven't found out about Camp Green Lake yet and Trout Walker, but that's coming up. You know who I'm talking about. And basically the curse, you know, that was on the camp as well, and how this was all, you know, everything was all fulfilled through Stanley Yelnats and Hector Zeroni, you know, as well, and how things were eventually taken care of, and at least in Stanley's mind and the mind of his father and everything. You know, the curse that went from Madame Zeroni to Elia, it really kind of got broken early, because she originally told him it was an eternal curse. However, Stanley was able to take care of things. I got the picture of the book Holes here as well. This is one of the newer covers of the book. And I've had a test question for a couple of years now that I always ask at the end of this book, you know, give the test. And I always ask my students to explain what the significance of the title Holes, what it is, you know, what that means. And I always specify, other than the fact that these boys were digging the holes in the bottom of the dry lake bed, what other meaning could it have? And I've had some very interesting answers over the years, a couple of them that I can think of right off the top of my head. The main one that I thought was a good answer a couple of years ago from, I think, the first class I had to read this book, is holes. You know, it's symbolic. It represents the holes in these people's lives. You know, Stanley was here at this camp, didn't deserve to be. He and his family, just their life is full of holes, things unfulfilled, things not working right in their lives, and you know, seemingly under a curse. And so, you know, I get different answers every year, but I think that was probably the best answer that I've gotten. But anyway, I want to talk about this. You got chapter 7, excuse me, we just had lunch. Chapter 7 and 8 today. And chapter 7 is an interesting chapter because it's kind of paralleling, you know, mathematical parallel lines. It's kind of paralleling what happened with Elia and what's happening with Stanley, comparing the two. Obviously, the main comparison is Elia was told by Madame Zeroni, carry that pig, the young pig, carry it up the mountain where where the water flows backwards, and let it get a drink out of that stream, and continue to do that every day. And Elia said, but I won't be able to carry the pig. She says, can you carry it today? Well, then you'll be able to carry it tomorrow. And of course, the whole point in this was that Elia, besides the pig growing up, Elia himself was becoming muscular and filling out, and to the point where he could carry this huge pig up the mountain at the end if he wanted to, and at the same time, to fulfill his part of the bargain, he would have been able to carry Madame Zeroni up the side of the mountain so she could drink out of the fountain as well. Now that's parallel with what's going on here with Stanley. Stanley, you shared, Romans 8:28 the other day. For we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love the Lord, who are called according to His purpose. And looking at it from the Christian standpoint, Stanley, this was working through Stanley. This was working everything out in their family that began with Elia and continued on down through the generations. Stanley's father is a complete failure, even though he has a lot of good ideas. Just nothing ever worked out. And his great grandfather was left in the desert there, and of course, how that's going to how that's going to work in as well. With Sam and the onions and rowing across the lake and Catherine Barlow, kissing Kate Barlow, and how all that's going to work into the final product of the story of the onions. How Stanley and Hector survived once they got across, and they found Sam's place where the onions grew, and that's how they lived. And not only that, but how eating the onions kept the yellow-spotted lizards away from them, because they didn't apparently like the smell and everything. So Elliot carrying the pig up the mountain, and in the process he becomes muscular. He fills out. He becomes a strong young man. Same way, Stanley is left out in the desert, basically the desert there, digging holes in the bottom of this lake bed. And Stanley was not a physical person. He said he was kind of overweight. Kind of reminded me when I was a kid. But anyway, kind of overweight, and how he dug the holes, and the fat started to drip off of him, and he became muscular. And so at the end of that, he gets to fulfill what Elliot didn't. He actually got to carry Hector up the mountain when Hector was at the point where he couldn't walk anymore, and so in doing so, he fulfilled the requirements in a way of Madame Zeroni. So in this chapter, it goes from Elia to Stanley and what he's doing. Stanley was still digging. His hole was about 3 feet deep, but only in the center, sloped upward to the edges. And how this is extremely hard for Stanley. And then it goes back to Elia again, then it goes back to Stanley again. And it's just kind of paralleling what happened to these two people, besides just giving us the background of why Elia, whatever saying that they had. They blame it on their great-grandfather. And anyway, so, Stanley is suffering. I don't think Elia suffered the way that Stanley did. I'm sure it wasn't easy as the pig got bigger to carry the pig up the side of the mountain. But it couldn't have been all that easy as the pig got larger. But I don't think Elia had to suffer the way Stanley has to suffer in this book. I mean, this was hard labor. It was agonizing, and to top it off, Stanley didn't even belong there. I'm not going to say he was framed. He was just a victim of circumstances. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then it goes back, and I don't know if you've noticed in here the song that the Yelnats family came up with. If only the woodpecker sighs, the bark on the tree was as soft as the skies. while the wolf waits below, hungry and lonely, crying to the moon, if only, if only. And this is kind of that phrase, if only, is kind of the theme song of the Yelnats family. If only I would have done this. If only I would have thought of doing this. If only I wouldn't have made that decision there. If only we would have done this. And that's kind of the, like I said, it's kind of the theme song of the whole Yelnats family, because seemingly every choice they have made for the last 100 years has been the wrong choice. And, you know, if only, I'm sure you've heard of the poem, two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not be one traveler and travel both. Anyway, it's hang on, what's the name of that poem? I have my 8th grade students memorize it every year. The Road Not Taken. Yeah, The Road Not Taken. And this is basically kind of similar to this as well for the Yelnats family. If only I'd have gone that way instead of that way. If only we wouldn't have moved there, but we'd have stayed where we were. Or if only we would have stayed, moved instead of staying where we were. If only I'd put this ingredient in. If only. And that's, I don't know if you know people like this. I certainly do. It seems like every choice that they have to make in life, I dropped my book, I'm sorry. Seems like every choice they have to make in life, either they overanalyze it or they're just poor choosers, but they seem to make the wrong choice nearly everything in their lives. So that finishes, takes us through chapter 7, and I just want to get the story arc going here. And I'm sure you've already seen it, but I just wanted to point it out. The parallels between Elia and Stanley. Elia with Madame Zeroni, and Stanley with Hector, who's Madame Zeroni's whatever great-grandmother, or whoever was, grandmother, great-grandmother. And how Stanley, in certain respects, this reminds me of the story of Joseph, being sold down into Egypt by his brothers, and gaining favor there, but still ending up in prison. And I'm sure I mentioned this the other day. How God used that to save Jacob, Israel, and his family from dying because of famine. And Joseph even pointed, as I said the other day, Joseph even pointed out to his brothers when they came and they were sorry because they got caught. They were sorry for what they had done, and they begged Joseph, don't kill us. And you remember what Joseph's reply was? It mentions it twice in the last 4 or 5 chapters of Genesis. I think once in chapter 45, then once in 49. He says, you thought evil, but God meant it for good. It wasn't you who sent me here. It was God who sent me here to preserve life. And this is kind of what's going on. Joseph was there 13 years, suffering almost the entire time before he was suddenly promoted, to vice president. I can say it that way, vice pharaoh of Egypt. And how the Lord just worked all things out for that. And I'm not saying this is a Christian book or anything, but I'm just making the comparison. All right, Stanley, again, no fault of his own, he is sent to this camp. And again, his family made a poor choice to send him there. Why, if they knew what this camp was, why would they send him here? Of course, they didn't know what kind of camp it was, but they thought it was something else. They thought it was like a summer camp or something. They were just totally ignorant of the things that were going on. And as a result of Stanley going there, it took care of everything. If Stanley wouldn't have gone there, first of all, he would have probably never met Hector Zeroni again. He would have never built up the strength that he needed to carry Hector up the side of the mountain and thus fulfill what Elia had left undone. And through all that, got Hector reunited with his mother, of course, and the day that all this was fulfilled, Stanley's father came up with the formula, made him rich overnight, basically. And how this arc, transpires over 100 years. The Yelnats family had nothing but suffered for 100 years, and who knows what the Zeroni family had done. We knew from an earlier chapter that Madame Zeroni's son had already gone to America before before Elia had. Chapter 8 here says, a lot of people don't believe in curses. A lot of people don't believe in yellow spotted lizards either, but if one bites you, it doesn't make a difference whether you believe it or not. And, the same way here, whether, the Yelnats family had jokingly just blamed it on Stanley's great-grandfather, Elia, for all these years, and whether they believed it or not, I think at a certain level, I think they believed in it. But when it kept making a difference in all their lives, or when their lives were not going right, it didn't make a difference whether they believed it or not. It was still bad things happening to you. Actually, it is kind of odd that scientists named the lizard after its yellow spots. Each lizard has exactly 11 yellow spots, but the spots are hard to see on its yellow-green body. The lizard is from 6 to 10 inches long and has big red eyes. In truth, its eyes are yellow, and it is the skin around the eyes which is red, but everyone always speaks of its red eyes. It also has black teeth and a milky white tongue. All right. If you've ever been close enough to see the yellow spots, you are probably dead. Okay. So, as I point out to my students, this is a short chapter here. It's not even. It goes from 41 to 42, but 41 is the beginning of a chapter, so it doesn't start till a third of the way down. And there's just a paragraph, a 5-line, 6-line paragraph on the second page. This whole chapter here is nothing but. It's 1 page long, and it's mostly talking about the yellow spotted lizards. And as I've pointed out to my students often, good writers don't just randomly throw things in that don't mean anything, that have no meaning or value to the story. And he's bringing up the yellow spotted lizard here because of what importance that plays at the end, where Hector and Stanley are stuck in the hole with this nest of yellow spotted lizards, and the camp counselors and the warden are just waiting for them to get bitten, so the boys would die. That would take care of all their problems then at the camp. But of course, they had eaten all those onions for, again, very fortuitous event there happened. That they had to live on something, and all they had was those onions, and they lived off of those, and that was what made the lizards not bite them. Again, how it worked out. Again, I think of the story of Jacob going down, fleeing from Esau, and going down to Laban, and I'm thinking even farther back than that, when Isaac, for Isaac's wife, the servant went down there and he got to the place and he prayed, and he said, I'm paraphrasing here, he said, Lord, let the maid who comes out and not only gives me something to drink, but offers to water my camels as well, may she be the one. And as it turned out, she was exactly of the family. She was Laban's brother, and how just things worked out there, and how later when Jacob fled from Esau, and he was gone 20 years, and I'm sure he thought that his life was over. He's going to live the rest of his life there. Think about Moses. The first 40 years he was raised in the house of Pharaoh. He fled from Pharaoh after he murdered, after he murdered the Egyptian, and the other Hebrew, knew that he had done it, so he knew he had to flee. And he was out living in the desert for 40 years. And then, he went up to the mountain burning bush, and God spoke to him. He spent the last 40 years of his life. So his life was divided into 3 segments, 40, 40, and 40. And how during all that time, you read through the New Testament, the writings of Paul, that Moses knew, before he fled from Egypt, that God had called him to bring deliverance to his people. But he spent the next 40 years of his life, I'm sure God was refining him out in the desert. He was, breaking off most of the rough edges, except for his temper. And then the last 40 years were the 40 most useful years of his life. and how the Lord just works things like that out, to fulfill His purposes. And again, this is not a Christian book by any stretch of the imagination, but I see so many parallels, biblical parallels, in here. And again, if you look at the big picture, how all this was fulfilled in 100 years. Well, I'm finished for today. I'll have another one for you tomorrow. Again, I know what you told me, you've read the entire book, so I'll be able to speak ahead like I did in some of this today, just because you already know, and maybe it might put some puzzle pieces together for you. So I'll talk to you tomorrow. Have a good day. See you.